Good morning.
Good morning.
Boy, it's been 2 years, I think, since I've been here in person at First Presbyterian. What a great day and what a great sign for our society, for our world, that we're able to do this again. So give thanks to God for bringing us all here to this point. I want to begin by thanking the Every Man's Bible Club for this invitation. It's always a delight to be with this particular group, and they've opened it up, their class, to the rest of the congregation. So all those who are not members of the EMBC, you should be, but I'm glad that you're here and that they've opened it up for all of you. Thanks to my good friend Tony Almeida for the initial invitation to come and lead this adult education series. I greatly appreciate it, and to the Roberts family for making this series possible. Thank you for your dedication to the cause of adult education. It's greatly appreciated. I'm on faculty at Hood Theological Seminary, which is located across the street from the Waffle House on the Jake, come visit us sometime. We're Salisbury Seminary. We're not just for one particular denomination or the particular students who are enrolled here. We're a resource for anyone who wants to come think about ethics, think about God, think about the Bible, think about history. We're here for you. And we've enjoyed over the years a special relationship as an institution with First Presbyterian Church. Our first president, and we call him our first president because he was the first president after we became independent from Livingstone College, Eppehimer, had a special connection to this church. Is one of his best friends was, of course, past Reverend Bob Lewis, and they developed a good friendship. And Bob, after he retired from First Presbyterian, came aboard at Hood and ran our Doctor of Ministry program, and did an excellent job for a number of years. Members of your congregation have served on our board of trustees, have been faithful and generous donors. I won't name everybody because I'm going to leave somebody out if I do, but that just shows how many people in this congregation support the seminary. I just want to say on behalf of the faculty, staff, and students, we greatly appreciate everything that you do for us. You've always had our back, and we thank you very much for that. Randy Kirby teaches pastoral care and counseling classes for us, and your senior pastors, Josh and Laura, will actually be serving as our commencement speakers at graduation this year. So the special relationship continues. So we're delighted for that. And last but not least, the Messenger Williams family, through a generous donation, have funded a community education initiative where every semester Hood offers a free community class. It's been taught online, so you don't have to physically come to campus. It involves some real-time Zoom interactions and some other ways to get at some theological and ethical materials. So I want to thank the Williams Messenger family for that partnership and making that possible. If you want to find out more information about our community education initiative, please come talk to me after any of these lectures. And I'll also have an email on the Hood website, so you're welcome to get in touch with me in that way. So why does Hood and First Presbyterian Church enjoy a special relationship? Well, I think it has something to do with the bones, not just of First Presbyterian, but with the Presbyterian Church and the Reformed tradition in which it stands. Methodists like to sing, Lutherans like to have faith, Episcopalians like to pray, Baptists like their Bible study, but Presbyterians have, from day one, liked to learn. They've been invested in education, they've been invested in asking the real hard, deep questions of the Christian faith. And this goes all the way back to the founder, John Calvin, who was a classic scholar, a lawyer, politician, a theologian, a biblical studies expert, and he was just interested in things. And so when events like this, when you can get together with a theological institution, I'd like to think that we're upholding the best of the Reformed tradition and the Presbyterian tradition. John Calvin would hopefully be proud of you all today. I'm sure he would. Whenever a society encounters an unanticipated altering event, it does a number of things. First of all, of course, it changes things. Things are not different, are no longer the same as they once were after the event takes place. But these surprising society-altering events also reveal things. They tell us things about ourselves that were already the case and well in place, but we just couldn't see them prior. And, you know, from everything I've been reading about the meaning of the pandemic and the larger ramifications of the pandemic, that seems to hold true. It's revealed a lot of things about the society that were covered up, concealed, but it rose to the surface. And we saw things maybe clearly that we should have seen before, but were unable to. The pandemic functioned as a kind of stress test for institutions. We got to see what our institutions were made of, our school systems, our churches, our political and economic systems. And sometimes we passed the test and sometimes we failed. You know, leaders of institutions, like many of you in this room, you discovered that you had to adapt. You had to shift, you had to adjust, you had to pivot, and if you didn't, you'd be SOL, as they say. So, you know, I won't go into detail. Of course, you know better than I do all the challenges we faced and what the pandemic revealed. Globalization, the supply chains, and the difficulty with those things, that really opened our eyes to that reality. Media, and how partisan news organizations have become on both sides. You know, the news used to be regarded as a public service by our major broadcasters, but now they're sources of profit. And because they're sources of profit, you have to identify a demographic, and you have to give the consumer what the consumer wants and frame the news the way that consumer wants the news framed if you want ratings. So we've seen that intensify over the past 2 years. We've had debates about history, American history in particular. What we thought, maybe the story about the United States that we learned about its founding growing up, it's been challenged, most notably by the 1619 Project and the scholar Nicole Hannah-Jones, who was invited, of course, to the UNC Chapel Hill and was disinvited and decided to leave actually when she was re-invited, and it got complicated. But this just shows you, you know, some of the issues that we're dealing with now and will continue to deal with as we slowly start to get back to normal. All these things, and I didn't mention all of them, but you can see them represented on the photograph here, the first handout. What unites all these things is they involve questions of truth. And what is true? And how do we know what is true? And how do we communicate what is true? The question of truth seems to be the predominant question, at least in American society at present. You know, I have to humbly confess that I'm not a historian, I'm not a political scientist, I'm not an economist, I'm not a expert on infectious disease. I'm just a humble theology and ethics instructor at a little seminary across the street from the Waffle House. So I can't handle all the expansiveness of this topic, but I can do what I've been trained to do, And that is to try to frame issues and see issues from a theological or an ethical frame of reference. I guess I'm reminded when I especially get together for dinner, socialize with faculty at Catawba College. I specialize in nothing that can be empirically verified. And some of them ask me, what do you even do? I mean, talk about invisible realities, talk about things that you can't run through the MRI machine or look at under a laboratory. They just kind of look at me like I'm some strange guy. And I'm reminded right after I graduated from the doctoral program, and I was able to be called a doctor. I was at a social occasion, and someone for the first time called me a doctor, and I was just so elated and excited. But my wife was by my side, and she said, "Oh, but he's not a real doctor." You can't answer any of the real questions you have, or you can't help you with any of your real problems or concerns. So I'm grateful to my wife. Keeps me humble, keeps me from becoming puffed up, as the Apostle Paul said. So I thank God for her. Not good for my self-esteem, but I guess good for my standing with God, I hope. So let's get going then. Let's talk about truth as it relates to the Christian faith, how you approach the Christian faith, how you understand the Christian faith, how you explain the Christian faith, how you bear witness to the Christian faith. We are, of course, not first century Christians. We're not Christians in the Middle Ages. We're not Christians from the 16th century, from the 17th century. We are Christians who live in the 21st century in North America. And the challenges, the intellectual challenges, the social challenges, the political challenges that we face are very different from the ones that previous generations of Christians faced. One of the big things that we have to deal with today that other Christians did not have to is we have to deal with what's called, quote unquote, the modern world. And when we talk about the modern world, we're talking about, I guess, mostly the world that was born when the scientific revolution began. The scientific revolution, for the first time, people in the Western world asked, can you prove it? Can you run an experiment on it? Can someone else repeat the experiment that you ran and come up with the same results? What this did, I mean, we take this for granted because, of course, we go through school, we take biology and chemistry, and we learn about the scientific method. So it's kind of become part of the air we breathe. But if you look at what this did in the context of Western thinking, I mean, it was a revolution. Because after the scientific revolution took place and people started to demand data and evidence, and when you said something, they didn't automatically believe you. They said, show me the figures, show me the numbers, show me the measurements. So this was a sea change in who got to speak and whose opinion was respected. The church and its clergy and theologians, our stock went way down. Because like I said before, we deal with invisible realities that can't be measured in a laboratory. And so when we started to make claims about where history was going and the nature of God, what salvation was like, what revelation was like, minds that had been turned on by the scientific revolution said, well, how in the world do you know that anything that you're saying is true? Well, no one ever asked the church that question before. And the church didn't really know how to field that fly ball and was stumbling badly. And sometimes when you are embarrassed, unsure, uncertain, don't know how to field a question, and it happens to me all the time with my students, they ask me a question, and I think, oh, God, do I just make one up? Do I dance around the issue? Do I evade it? Do I just come out and tell them I don't know? I mean, you're kind of thrown. Your confidence is shaking, and you don't know what to do. But sometimes what people do when they don't know what to do is they act defensively, and they just well, that's just because the way it is. That's what it is because I say it is, and they appeal to their arbitrary authority rather than any kind of reasoned analysis or data or numbers. And this is what the church and how the church initially responded to the challenge of the scientific revolution. Well, we're teaching what we've always been teaching since the very beginning. And we've been given the keys by Jesus, given to St. Peter, and we're continuing the tradition. The church says that even the gates of hell can't prevail against us, so we've got the backing of the Holy Spirit. So what we say must be true and accurate. And then the scientific revolution says, well, what is the Holy Spirit? And then we answer, well, it's an invisible reality that flies around, it comes on people, it helps you read the Bible, it inspires you to speak, it's the energy that's circulating through the church, it's when you take Holy Communion or the Lord's Supper, it's active, it's present. And they say, oh, this sounds like a ghost or some kind of phantasm. This sounds very superstitious. This doesn't seem to be anything that can fit into the new scientific worldview, because it can't be run through an MRI machine. It can't be looked at in a laboratory. So it seems like you're just making an arbitrary appeal to an invisible reality to bolster your authority and to keep telling us what to do. And it was here that people said, well, the emperor has no clothes. The pope, the pastor, they've got these vestments on, but that's all they got. They're just dressed up. If you want to know what's really going on, you go over to the university, and you go over to the science department, and the natural science department, and the philosophy department, because they're dealing with reason, they're dealing with real things, and these theologians and pastors, they have no idea what they're talking about. It's just a bunch of hot air. So the modern world begins in this way, and the church immediately finds itself on the defensive. And it's asking itself some hard questions. It says, is this passing trend, a phase or a fad? Can we just hunker down and wait it out, and maybe things will change? Some people thought that maybe this could be done, but other people noticed how much the scientific revolution was changing the way people were thinking. And it was exciting them, and it was turning them on, and it was making them ask all kinds of new questions, and you could see the results of it, and the advances and innovations. And it had power, and it was doing things. And the church kind of looked at these developments enviously. We're just trying to preserve this ancient heritage, and it felt like the church was not going anywhere, doing anything new, and everything that was happening in the university, in the sciences. And so there were some people in the church that said, if we don't start changing, we don't start adapting, we're going to be out of luck. We're going to find ourselves in the dustbin of history. So, the scientific revolution was no joke. And it caused Christians to think differently about the faith in a way that no other Christian before had thought about the faith. Before the scientific revolution, Christian civilization, starting in the ancient Near East, then it migrates to North Africa, then eventually finds its home in Europe. And Europe, during the Middle Ages, was a Christian civilization. And when you live in a Christian civilization, you don't question the Christian faith. You don't ask hard, critical questions about it. It would be like a fish asking questions about the water that they're taking in, or us asking deep, critical questions about the air we breathe. We just didn't think about it because it was everywhere and in everything. It was the substance in which we all moved. And so the scientific revolution for the first time said, is this air you're breathing the air you should be breathing? And we never thought about it that way. And it was frightening. It was scary. One of the startling developments, it didn't happen immediately in theology, but it happened in the area of morality, was that the scientific revolution was causing some people to ask critical questions about morality itself. Now, morality up to this time was basically a matter of right and wrong. What was right and what was wrong? And you discern what was right and what was wrong by appealing to the divine commands. Well, it's what God says is right. What God says is wrong. God determines. So how do you know what God determines? Well, it's in the book. It's in the Bible. And so you look up what God commands to figure out what is right or what is wrong. Other Christians said God had built a system of morality within the natural order. So if you observed and analyzed and reflected upon the natural order, morality could be discerned. Right and wrong could be discerned in that way. But a guy named David Hume came along, a Scotsman, revolutionized morality. And he did so by saying, morality does not deal with objective facts. It deals with human subjective predispositions. And so we want to break down what he meant by that with an example. A few years ago, I was parked at a convenience store to buy gas. And I don't know the last time you've ever seen anyone come to blows in a fist fight. It had been a while for me. I mean, not since I was a kid in school, but there in the convenience store parking lot that day, I saw two guys going at it. And one guy looked well over 6 feet, well over 200 pounds. And the other guy, he was brave, but boy, he was not as big as this other guy. He was really taking it on the chin. And just when you see violence like that up close, it just startles you and shocks you. It's like, what? I didn't, you're reminded maybe about, or you see our primal selves come out, our uncivilized selves, our brutal selves. And my first, this is terrible, this is horrible, this is unjust. A larger man is pummeling a smaller man, and boy, if he keeps it up, he might kill him. Well, if I were to look at that event the way philosopher David Hume looked at it, he would say, your moral judgment or your moral evaluation about what's going on there is not a matter of factual analysis. It's purely subjective on your part. And he said, what do you mean? Right is right, wrong is wrong. Anyone can see that fight is an obvious immoral act. It's unjust. He said, no, factually, if you just want to look at that factually, what you see is a man over 6 feet, over 200 pounds, and he's cocking his fist back and striking it across a smaller man's face, and the man's face pops back, and he does it again and again and again, and that's the factual reality of what's going on. It's just the facts reporters' account of that fight. And that factual description of that fight does not carry any moral weight. He's just telling us what's happening. Now, when I say that that's wrong, Hume would say, okay, yeah, but you didn't get that from the actual facts of the case. The facts of the case are neutral. You feel like that's wrong, and that's inside yourself. But not everyone might read that same situation the same way. Someone who's a big fan of UFC might say, oh my God, what a beautiful punch. Look at the skill with which that man is pummeling that guy. Another person might say, oh, isn't it wonderful when the strong assert themselves and no longer feel bound by conventional morality and power is on display and you can see what human beings are capable of. So, well, the way Hume put it is, you can't get an ought, what you should do, or what should be the case, from an is. The isness is neutral. The isness is just happening. And my subjective moral evaluation of that act, it's in here. It's not out there, it's in here. So it has nothing to do with the facts. So I don't know if that makes any sense to you. But this was a sea change in moral philosophy. Because before then, people said, no, right is right and wrong is wrong, and it's factual. And Hume says, no, it's not. It's a matter of subjective apprehension, sir.
How about the fact that we've got a bully beating up on a small guy?
Yeah, well, the fact that you're calling him a bully means, for Hume, that you're making a subjective moral evaluation about that person.
That's a truthful fact.
Well, yeah, so I guess you would reject Hume's moral reason, and many people have. But you know, I have Joe Friday on the just the facts. That's what Hume was about. Just the facts.
Stating just facts.
And morality exists not out there in the world, but in the subjective interior of the person, or whatever you want to call it, the heart, the mind, the soul, the spirit, whatever. That's where morality resides. We're not dealing with facts when we're dealing with morality. We're dealing with subjective judgments, and no one ever thought about morality in that way before, and it floored people. It'd be like someone took gravity away from you, and now you were floating in in a moral vacuum, moral space, and you didn't know what was right, and you didn't know what was wrong. And could we talk about right and wrong objectively, or were we just talking about purely subjective apprehensions on the part of the human being? And if that's all we were talking about, then what kind of universe are we living in? What kind of universe are we living in? We just make up morality. We just have to get people to root for a team that guy is a bully, while someone else is rooting for a team, that guy is displaying his power, and that's impressive.
And I could put an end to that fight. I'm going to the trunk of my car, got a baseball bat, I'm hitting that bully in the head. And that be it. Lights out.
Yeah, we need people like you to watch these parts, so make distinctions and airy-fairy analysis, but yeah.
I think we should ask the underlying question of what started the fight.
And whether that was warranted to result in a fight is a matter of your subjective judgment, I would say here.
That's right.
Not promoting, don't tell Josh and Laura, I'm not promoting church, but I'm just trying to talk about, what's going on at the time, following the scientific revolution. Then it ripples into morality. And then we get to a guy named Gottwald Lessing, G.E. Lessing, famous European intellectual in the 18th century. And in the 18th century, the scientific revolution is going on, but people invested in the scientific revolution are still in church. Not the case necessarily today, but they're still in church. So, they're doing their scientific investigations during the week, and they're going to church on the weekends. And Lessing one day gets out of church and he just says, I can't do it anymore. I cannot do it anymore. I can't play this double game. During the week, I'm dealing with natural science, I'm dealing with evidence, dealing with data. And then I go into church and the preacher is talking about reports from the first century that I have to take on faith and I have to make it an essential part of my worldview. And he said, no, I ain't gonna do this anymore. I can't live like this. On the handout, it's called Lessing's Ditch. That's a topic we talk about in our introductory course in theology. Lessing writes, I live in the 18th century, and in the 18th century, miracles don't happen anymore. You know, I want to see one. I'm walking around downtown. I want to see someone turn water into wine. I want to see someone being raised from the dead, but I don't see it. It's not happening. He starts thinking, was it the case that reality was different? The laws of nature were different in the first century than they are today? Or was it the case that the way the world is assumed to work today is the same as the way the world worked back then? And if that's the case, Lessing says, then they must have been mistaken about miracles, or they can't, their testimony about the miraculous cannot be trusted or taken on face value. He, of course, says it might have happened. They might have taken place, as the Gospels say they did, but guess what? I'm in the 18th century, and that's the first century, and there's a big ditch between the two, and it's a ditch that I can't cross because time travel hasn't been invented yet. It'd be great if I could take my tripod, my video camera, and go back to the first century and see whether these things actually happen, but I can't. So I'm just asked to take this on faith. And he says, you know, I'm a modern man. And I can't play that game anymore. So how can I continue to go to church? Because there was tremendous social pressure to go to church. And there was a part of him that wanted to find a reason to continue to go to church. And so the way he figured it out, he says, I can't base my Christianity on whether the miraculous happened or did not happen. But what I can base it on is morality and the moral teachings of Jesus. Because those moral teachings of Jesus can be evaluated, can be reasoned, can be reflected on, and we can tell whether they're sound, whether they're right, whether they're true. And so when I go to church now, says Lessing, I'm going to focus on the moral teachings of Jesus. And whether anyone got out of the tomb on the third day, whether water was turned into wine, whether anybody was healed, I'm putting that to the side and I'm not going to worry about it. It's the morality that I'm after. And that's the only way I can continue to come to this church, said Lessing. And Lessing was not alone. He was speaking for a whole generation of intellectuals who thought the same way, who were feeling the same way.
To be safer from discussing scientific fact versus morality, to start with a proposition that the most important things in life are things you can't see. And then you get into Christ's teaching love, right? You can't see it, but you can see the effects of it. But in scientific method, it's a study of facts and provable facts. So they really shouldn't come into conflict.
You are anticipating my next slide.
Great segue.
So I realize we're getting short of time. What time do we wrap up? Is that 12 June I have?
No, it's any time around 10:30, but go as long as you need to.
Go. I'll try to hurry up. In the 19th century, a brilliant theologian, the leading theologian of his generation, German, Albrecht Ritschl, listening to this, watching what he was doing, overhearing what Lessings and his buddies were saying. And he said, no one is taking stock of the situation. No one is thinking strategically in the church about what to do with these people. And if we don't, the church is going to lose all its intellectuals and its educated people within a generation or two. So if we do not change, if we do not adapt, we're going to be dead in the water. And so he tried to plot the way forward for the church. And he thought that the way forward for the church was to work with this facts values distinction of Hume. There was factual reality, and it was objective, and it can be observed. And then there was moral value. And moral value, he went with Hume, it was completely subjective, it existed within the self, it did not pertain to the world of facts. So he said, we're going to use this and move forward as a strategy for the future of the church. So he said, this is how it's going to work. Science gets facts, and the church is going to take morality and moral value. And this is the way we're going to work together, and we're not going to step on one another's toes. And a scientist, with this distinction, is going to be able to come to church on Sundays, and a Christian is going to be able to work in the university during the week, and there will be no conflict so long as we stay on our side of the line. Science gets facts, we get moral values. Yes, sir.
So there's no virgin birth. Christ is just a Jewish holy man.
Well,
Secular humanism.
Ritschl was a shrewd and crafty politician. He would never take on a direct question like that. He knew that this is where it was headed, but he would say, you have to subtly reinterpret miracles in a way that they symbolically express moral truth and moral value. Metaphors, exactly. So, resurrection. What is resurrection? Well, we're not going to get into specifics about it on Easter Sunday, but we're going to subtly try to change the way we talk about Easter. And we're going to talk about it as a vindication or an affirmation by God about Jesus' moral vision. Jesus, his moral vision is something that needs to hang around because it's so good. And the way God expresses this truth is through this event, the story of someone being risen from the dead. This life has to continue because the morality that it teaches is so valuable and so true. And that's what Easter teaches. Now, don't get into the weeds about whether it actually happened. You just hover around the surface and talk about symbols. And the most important thing is the moral vision of Jesus. But this then led eventually to questions about the resurrection. You know, could the resurrection be reframed as just an affirmation of Jesus' moral teachings? And questions and debate and discussion, of course, soon followed. And the central question here that was posed to Ritschl when people figured out what he was doing, what was going on was, okay, is this just a natural phase or evolution of the Christian faith that needs to happen? Because if the Christian faith is going to continue, it has to keep pace with developments and changes in society. Or has Ritschl, in essence, started a new religion that's altogether different from the historic Christianity that we've all known? So this was the essential question. And people started going back to Paul's letter to the Corinthians, his first letter, the 15th chapter. And there Paul says, you know, if Jesus was not raised, the whole thing is a sham. The whole thing is a lie. Because if Jesus is not raised, then we have no ultimate hope for the future.
Correct.
We have no ultimate hope that history is going anywhere.
Correct.
That God is going to do something with this world.
Correct.
And so, you know, if the Apostle Paul was around, the Apostle Paul would say, don't mess with my resurrection. Because if you mess with my resurrection, the whole house of cards will fall. And so, but this was the gamble, the wager that Ritschl and his followers made. Could you keep the Christian faith, the Christian project going by emphasizing morality and de-emphasizing or subtly fudging miraculous? And of course, then the last slide, we're going to wrap up, so don't worry, is the aftermath of this. So Ritschl and his project, he is he's actually the father of Christian fundamentalism, because Christian fundamentalism would never have arisen without Ritschl, because fundamentalism arises to respond to the challenge of Ritschl and say, no, we're not going to take the deed. We're not going to stay in the realm of moral value. We want to be in the facts game too. And boy, were they ever into facts. And so they read the Bible, front to cover as factual information. And no one ever read the Bible in this way, in a conscious way, before. Fundamentalism purports to be the way everyone has always done it from the first century, but they didn't. No one ever sat down and said, I must read this Bible as factually correct. They never even thought to have to read the Bible in that way. So that you make a determined effort to do so shows that we're already in the modern era. This is a different way of reading the Bible that has not been seen before. Another question. Those who stuck with Ritschl and thought he was right and took his strategy forward, were they able to stick with the church? Were they able to stick with Christianity? Or did they move on and migrate to something else? Because they realized if they were only in it for the morality, there were other places they could go for the morality. They didn't have to wade through 66 books of the Bible. They could read Aristotle, they could read Immanuel Kant, they could read some of the great moral philosophers. So was there an easier, more effective delivery system for morality than the church? So I don't know, but one way you can answer that question is to look around mainline churches today and see how are the pews doing? How many people are there? And if they're not there, why aren't they there? Is it because if they thought they were coming for the morality, they realized that they didn't have to do all this other stuff to get there? Open question. The bottom line is we're still asking these questions. They have not been resolved. Theology is notoriously slow. We chew on things forever. We talk in circles like I've been doing this whole time. And my wife just pulls her hair out. She doesn't even do anything real that helps anybody. I'll make a career change and then do something useful in my life. But we are now, and I know Pastor Josh did a brilliant presentation on Charles Taylor's Secular Age, I think back in January. Great book. And Charles Taylor in here says, what's unique about believing in our time is that it is now hard to believe. It's harder to believe than it ever was. And the reason it's hard to believe is because we're the first group of Christians in history who think to ourselves, could we be mistaken? Could we have been lied to? Could we have been misguided? And even the most faithful and devout among us, Charles Taylor thinks, harbor these questions late at night. We're driving around in our car, and we're going to a church meeting. What am I doing here? I'm going to this organization that's committed to this notion that someone in the first century was crucified, died, buried, and has been risen again. What? This sounds crazy. Just want to stop and think about it. This sounds crazy. And people in Christian civilizations never thought to ask themselves whether this was true, whether this was crazy. And what compounds this is that people we live next to now in our communities think it's crazy, and they say it's crazy. And so we have anxiety on the basis of, because we know other people don't think like us. And the atheist has anxiety because the atheist knows that not everyone thinks like they do. And so we are never confident in our beliefs, says Charles Taylor. We're always harboring the suspicion that we might be wrong. And this is new territory for us. And it's the fertile ground, I hope, in which we will now move forward to the next 3 weeks and we'll look at the way that other theologians have navigated this uncertainty and tried to give direction to the church in a way that was different from Rachel.
T.S. Eliot delivered a series of lectures at Cambridge in 1939 toward a Christian society, and he answers those questions on what society should do to overcome this secular age.
Excellent. Thank you for your patience. I hope I didn't wear you out.